Another question. Is it not so that up until maybe the 19th century that China looked upon, if they didn't occupy much of the area east of the Urals, but that in the 19th century the Russians essentially were able to take it away from the Chinese?
Yeah, there were
looking forward to reoccupying it.
Yeah, there were treaties with Russia in the 1750s, and then one about 100 years later, in which vast tracts of territory was ceded by the Qing dynasty, by the Manchu dynasty, to Russia, an expansionist Russia. And I have always thought that one day China would want to take that territory back. And they're taking it back now demographically, because, you know, there are only about 8 million Russians east of the Urals now. So many have moved back to European Russia. And there are now an estimated 6 or 7 million illegal Chinese immigrants in places like Vladivostok and Irkutsk and the rest. So in terms of numbers, yeah, that was part of the Qing dynasty reached up into the steppes as far north as the tundra. And no one had any interest at that point in time in going any further north. And that territory was all ceded to Russia. In 1898, of course, the area east of the Ala River, where Vladivostok is, the Russian Far East, was ceded because the Russian emissary, the Russians were thought to be more sympathetic to China than the French and the British and the Americans, and so the Russians were invited in to negotiate a peace after the Boxer Rebellion. And of course, the 8 power troops were occupying Beijing, and the Empress Dowager and her court had fled, and so they were eager to reach a peace, and they asked the Russians to help them. Well, the Russians used false maps to convince the Chinese to sign a treaty, which resulted in the entire Russian Far East being taken from the Qing dynasty, from the Qing, and handed over to Russia. Those are all sore points, as you can imagine.
I read recently that the Chinese electronics industry has come within 80% of the American electronics industry in output.
In output, well, it depends on what kind of what we're talking about in output. But the U.S.-China Commission, in its report from June of this year, said that China is now, in terms of electronics technology, 2.1 years behind South Korea and about 7 years behind us. Now, 10 years ago, they would have been 20 years behind South Korea and 30 years behind us. I mean, they're closing the gap very, very quickly.
Did they not just recently, a Chinese company purchased the IBM laptop business, the manufacturer, and now that's, are we not, it's not the United States funding the rearmament of China?
Oh yeah, we're funding their military buildup. And I don't know if I have it here in my notes, but their policy, and they stated, Deng Xiaoping stated this policy in the early 90s after the Tiananmen demonstrations, when it was clear that many Chinese young people admired American democracy and wanted China to democratize. He said, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, he said there's now a new Cold War, not between the Soviet Union and the United States, but between China and the United States. So he actually declared a Cold War against us. But he also declared at one point he said that Deng Xiaoping advised his successors, and this was repeated by Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, that we must bide our time and hide our capabilities, and that we must also combine the military and the civil and give priority to the military, so that the economic buildup that we see in China today is being viewed by the government, at least, as a means to improve China's weaponry and improve its capabilities across the board. That's one of the purposes that work here. And by giving them $200 billion in hard currency, of course, we make it easy for them to buy weapons from Russia and build their own armaments factories. So I think, you know, I mean, China is if you want a world of peaceful democratic states, on the theory that that democracies do not normally make war one upon the other, then China is the largest hurdle, the largest stumbling block to that world that we would like to achieve. Terrorism is a disease of the skin. China is a disease of the heart.
I just wanted to mention two things, and I'm sure the first one is that the Chinese have a very aggressive space program,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure it was
Mm-hmm.
very well funded.
Yeah.
The second thing is, goes back to your closing, which is growing up as a young girl in the Philippines. There was always, we were taught to pray, the morning offering.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how at the end, for the intentions of the Holy Father,
Mhm.
one of the intentions was always for the conversion of China.
Yeah, and it's important that we still pray that. Years ago, I had dinner with Cardinal Sin, who's now gone to a better world. Cardinal Sin was had a Chinese father and a Filipino mother, and his name Sin, of course, was from the Chinese Shun, which in the Fujian dialect is Sin. He got a lot of mileage out of the fact that his name was Cardinal Sin. His biography was called The House of Sin. He was one of 17 children. Anyway, but in part because of his Chinese father, in part because he was asked by the Vatican to do this, he set up a seminary for Chinese seminarians in the 60s, and had 30, 40, 50 Chinese seminarians there from China at any given time. And the seminary chapel was built in the traditional Chinese Catholic fashion, filled with Chinese Catholic religious art. It was there on the grounds of his seminary where the local priests were being trained as well. But and he went to China on 3 different occasions, trying to normalize relations between the Vatican and the Chinese Communist Party. The party doesn't want any organization that could conceivably be a focal point of resistance or an organizational structure around which resistance could coalesce, because they studied the collapse of communism in Poland and in the Soviet Union and in other countries, and they saw the great role that the Catholic Church played in Poland and the Czech Republic and some other places. And so that's why the ongoing persecution, I believe, will not cease anytime soon, and nor will relations between the Vatican and the People's Republic of China be normalized anytime soon.
And I know also that growing up, the government, I always heard that if China invaded Taiwan, we would just vote away.
You would.
The Philippines would be a boat ride.
That's right. Well.
Yeah, so
Well, there has been conflict.
The illegal Chinese are coming into northern Philippines.
There has been conflict between China and the Philippines over the South China Sea, where China, about 15 years ago, realizing that there were natural gas reserves and potentially oil reserves in the South China Sea, suddenly decided that it owned it. The southern reaches of the South China Sea are over 1,000 miles from the Chinese mainland. But no, we own it all, and Brunei and Malaysia and the Philippines and Vietnam and Indonesia have no claims because it's all ours. And they actually drove away Filipino naval vessels from islands that are only about, what is the southern island? Salawan? Sulu? Yeah, some of these islands that China claims are only, 20, 30 miles from the Philippine archipelago. So, yeah, they're...
Yeah, my brother was a diplomat, and he was actually involved with all some of those negotiations. It's my point.
Yeah.